What is going on, everybody? And we got a good one for you today. I'm excited. I was really excited researching this just because this is something that you hear all the time in the industry. And it's about how genetics play a role in weight loss, fat loss, weight management, like health and fitness results, right? And what were the initial, what I want to go through right away, Matt, is like before you started researching, what were your thoughts? Like what were on this topic? What did you think? What was your opinion?
Man, it made me think back a couple real life examples and like buddies I grew up with who were blessed genetically and like just raw athletes. And I think we've all either been around or seen that or even heard stories of that. But that's the first thing I thought of was like, okay, who's been in my life that would be an example of what we're going to talk today? And immediately I can think of two people. I'll give you like an avatar, one example, right? This person I feel like could put on muscle in their sleep, right? Just genetically blessed. Uh, could dunk since we were like in seventh, maybe eighth grade, could dunk a basketball. Would warm up with bench 315 in high school. Like what he would eat is just like, think about like gas station food, like gummies, soda, Mountain Dew, right? Like that's his diet. That's what he consists of. Didn't even eat lunch. Like we just kind of snack throughout the day. And yeah, so when I think of genetics, I think of somebody like that. His name was Namdi. Shout out Namdi. He was another one is Chase. Chase is another dude that was just like athletically gifted, could run like the wind. And I'm thinking of another buddy too, Amir. Amir is one of the fastest people I've ever knew in high school in football. He's one of our wide receivers. And he ran a 4.3, I think a 4.3 or 4.4 in Air Forces on like we had the laser timer, but our track was so shitty. It was like a gravel track, right? Like so he's running that in Air Forces, and so dude could absolutely fly.
That's cool.
But yeah, I just think of like genetically blessed people from an athletic standpoint, where I'm like, damn, dude, like imagine if they did the right stuff. Like imagine if they like took it to the next level. And then those are the ones that are just absolute freaks, right? Like that actually have that ability kind of to go to the next level and build off kind of like their God-given ability, you know? So that's what I first think of. But what about you, man?
Yeah. I mean, on that side of it, Jimmy, my boy Jimmy, from
Yeah.
I was in college. Same thing as what you'd eat the worst diet I've ever seen in my life. But
Terrible.
you look at him, you would think that he just is clean. He eats clean and he works out all the time. And it's like pizza rolls and corn dogs
Dude.
and all that stuff.
Yep.
He's my boy. But what I was thinking about too, so I wasn't thinking in that side of things, but you're dead spot on there as far as like, there's some people that, and I have good genetics, honestly. Like I would, for the longest time, just could kind of do whatever I wanted to. Right. And it starts to
I'm
kind of,
good too.
when it starts to come back to bite you a little bit in certain areas, you got to be a little bit more on point.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought going into my research, I was like, okay, genetics play a role, and I thought that they do play a role, right? But I just believe that the environment plays a bigger role, right? That was my initial thought. I think that the people you spend your time around, friends, family, coworkers, huge. Like, are they in good shape? Are they bad shape? Are they overweight? What habits do they have? What are their eating habits? How much do they move and exercise? Plays a lot of role in how you're going to also go forward with that. Like, it's like what you see on a regular basis, you start to mirror. Now, how you set up your house, food, like, what you have access to, how someone plans their week around food and exercise. Like, I think that is a huge thing. That was my initial thoughts, right? I was like, what do I personally think? Before I even get into the research, I wrote that stuff down because I was just I wanted to compare that towards my thoughts after the research.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's so much that goes into it. It's interesting. You know what I think? I think people also use the whole genetic piece as a crutch sometimes, right? And
Yeah.
they put themselves behind, they make it harder on themselves than they do. Like, and so I think it's one of those interesting topics, man. So I'm curious to see like what, I know you did some research, you dove in, What are some of the things that you found after your kind of initial reactions, and then you dove into the research a little bit? I'm curious to see like what you actually found.
Yeah. I found a lot of stuff. I looked into a handful of different research articles. One of the initial studies I looked into, it showed, like, the summary was, it showed that it's not directly, that obesity was not directly linked to diet or
Mm,
genetic flow. It was closer to the combo of both of those.
yep.
And that people are impacted differently, right, by certain different kinds of diets that they have based on their genetic predisposition. So it was like, certain levels of sugar are going to affect different people in a
Mm,
different way, like more negatively on certain populations. Same thing with like high levels of fat, like it impacts certain based on their genes, can impact people in a different way as well. And then it talked about, I don't know if you encountered this in your research, and it kind of rung a bell a little bit, but I hadn't looked too much into it. The fat mass and obesity gene, FTO gene.
mm,
It came up a few times in my research articles that I was looking into, and it talked about how, like, that plays a role in obesity, type 2 diabetes, other metabolic diseases, and that it's been linked to an increase in obesity. And there's other ones that popped up too. Brain drive nootropic factor. So it says a gene that may be involved in appetite control. Nootropic tyrosine kinase receptor type 2. That's a hell of a one right there.
mm.
A gene associated with obesity is what it says there. Some of these are really hard to say. Carboxypeptidase is a gene involved in appetite regulation. I'm not even going to try this one, but it's another one that's a gene involved in appetite regulation. So there's like multiple ones that kind of popped up throughout that are like involved in like ability to regulate appetite, ability to like limit your caloric intake. Like it just becomes a little bit more difficult. And so that was like the first one that popped up to me. It was talking about the genes do play a factor, but it's really the combination of a lot of different factors that are gonna determine like how somebody's ability to lose weight, how obese or overweight that they are.
Yeah, I think they're gonna play a factor, especially of like at what point you start or you begin your journey. That's where I think they play a big part. Is like, so there's gonna be people like your buddy, my friends, that like they're gonna be able to start way further ahead genetically, right? Because they're genetically blessed. They have a lot easier time packing on muscle than the majority of people, like things like that. So when we're talking about fat loss specifically, and we're talking about obesity, those people are going to be, of course, they're going to be steps ahead. However, you might be in one of their shoes, and they might just take it for granted until like they start to get older and things don't work as well, and what they used to just kind of breeze over, they actually have to start paying attention to now. Whereas if you're not genetically blessed, you might have to start, implementing some of the nutritional habits and lifestyle and things like that a lot earlier than somebody who's genetically blessed, because uh, you can't afford to, right? Like you might be on this listening to this now, and you're like, dude, if I even look at a Snickers, I feel like I gained 10 pounds, right? And like you might be in that category. And so you probably have to put habits into place a lot quicker, with a lot more consistency and a lot more effort than somebody else might have to. And I think that's just kind of like understanding your cards and how they've been dealt, and be like, okay, this is what it is. But at some point, everybody is going to have to play them. You just got to kind of play your cards that you've been dealt, And I think if you take that approach and realize that you're going to have some things that are easier than people, and you're going to have some things that are more challenging than other people. And so just like accepting that, and just kind of dealing with what you've been dealt, and just not taking no for an answer, and be like, I'm going to pursue this anyways, and I'm going to just give it what I got. I think that's how you're going to put yourself and stack the cards in your favor, versus just going, oh man, well, my mom's big, my dad's big, I'm destined to be big, right? And you kind of just label yourself and you put yourself in these categories. Look, this process is already challenging. It's already difficult. That's why not everybody's walking around super fit, healthy, and in shape. But if you mentally sabotage yourself, if you mentally screw yourself, I think you make it even harder. And so don't make this process that's already, I'm not going to lie, it's extremely difficult. Don't make it even more challenging than it already is, just because you haven't been genetically blessed here. You might have that gene that you were talking about where you're like, dude, you lean more towards the obesity side on the scale naturally. And that's just kind of, those are your cards that you've been dealt, right? Like that's what you have to deal with. So it's interesting, man.
Yeah, no, it is really interesting, and it is like that. It's almost like these folks that are a little bit more predisposed to being overweight or obese. Like they really need to like dial it in a little bit more, right? It's
Yeah.
really about. It's almost like we talk about like the 80-20 rule with your nutritious to non-nutritious foods. It's like you got to be almost a little bit even more on some
Yeah.
scales, right?
Yeah.
And it's like you gotta really be moving, right? It's like all like just like walk, like really sticking with a step goal and stuff like that. Whereas other folks may be able to get away with going off track for a week, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you can't get away with going off track a week as much. That's kind of what it seems like. And I just, time and time again, these studies that I looked into, they just kind of talked about that. It's like, one of them talked about the relationship between like higher carbohydrate intake and weight gain on like people that had a more genetic predisposition to obesity versus not. And it's like they're much more likely to gain weight on like a high, but that also didn't talk about other factors, right? Whereas this other study talked about like genetic makeup and how it really does, like it is, like they're important, but it's really the environment, right? It's like your diet, your exercise, the people around you that are going to play a crucial role in your body weight and your ability to change your body weight, right? So I kind of just throughout all of the stuff that I looked into, it was really it was talking about, yes, there is a definite like impact that it has, but that the impact isn't necessarily 100% known because it's such a combination of things. So it's like you'd
Yeah.
have to look into each individual circumstance to really know exactly it's where somebody's at. Because like, okay, yeah, you have the genes that are a little bit more associated with obesity, but it's like let's look at not just that, right? Because you could look at that in many people, and I'm sure there's plenty of people that have that are in great shape and they
Yeah.
have great habits, right? But it's if this one person, it's like almost what I think of is like it's like on it's like that person, it's your time to change that, right? Because a lot of times you see families and they're like as a whole they're overweight, right? It's like everybody, and it starts as a kid, right? It's like how are your habits around food? How are your habits around movement, right? And a lot of times that comes from your parents and your friends that you create or that you have and your brothers and sisters and everybody close to you, right? And then it's like you carry those on and then you give those to your kids, right? So it really starts along those lines. And maybe you do have genes that make it a little more difficult, but it is like how are you brought up? How, and at any point you can change that narrative. And that doesn't just necessarily change it for you, it could change it for your wife and your kids, and then that could end up changing it for your grandkids and like everybody past that. So it's an interesting thing, right? It's like it's a really cool thing when it comes to somebody in this situation where you're somebody who has been blaming your lack of results or your lack of weight loss or the fact that you're overweight on your genes, because we've heard it time and time again from people out there, not necessarily saying like I've heard it from people on calls, I've heard it from people in when I had my Facebook group, right? It was like kind of, oh, I'm doomed, like it doesn't really matter what I do because I'm in this situation and I can't change it, right? Whereas it's like, okay, you can't necessarily change the fact that you have these genes, right? But you can change the other things in your life to help you move in the direction that you want to move in, right? And maybe it's going to be a slower progression than somebody else, but that goes back to the whole notion of like not comparing yourself to others on the same journey, because we're all going to be in a different lane and moving at different speeds based on a million different factors.
Yeah. That's super important too. I think I'm almost thinking the answer that I would give to somebody if they know, let's just say hypothetically that that person is not genetically blessed. They are dealt the cards like that you were talking about, traditionally being a little bit more on the obese side naturally. I've even read in how our hormones respond is also related to genetics as well, right? So if somebody has naturally higher levels of testosterone versus somebody who doesn't, versus how much growth hormone you have in your body. Like all those things, are genetics are going to play a factor in that. And let's just say hypothetically that's the given. Let's say we weren't blessed in that area. I encourage people to think on the side of, okay, if all these things are true, what am I going to do now? Like, what's my action plan now? What am I going to choose to do now? And a good frame of mind to also put yourself into is go, okay, if what I'm trying to pursue, whether it's I want to lose the 20 pounds, whether it's I want to get the six pack, whether it's I want to get the more energy, if somebody with less resources than I've had, and let's just say they're not as blessed as me genetically, but they were able to achieve the thing that I want, that should give you confidence. That should be like, dang, if nobody in my family has done it before, nobody in my remote friend group has done what I want to achieve, cool. I'm going to look at that as like an opportunity. I'm going to, just like you're saying, like, I want to be the one to change the narrative. I want to
Yeah.
be the one that's going to take that step forward. And I encourage people to accept all the things that are true. Say, yes, I am naturally a little bit more obese. I don't have as high as testosterone as other people, when looking at the data. My growth hormone isn't as high or in adequate levels as I would like it to be. So my recovery, my ability to build muscle is not as good as, some other people. Okay, yes, those things are true. Now what? What are you going to do now? And I think if you look at those circumstances and go, man, why me? Play the victim mentality, it's going to be super hard for you. But if you could take those things and be like, cool, let's do it. Let's do this anyways, right? I want to do that. I want to be the first one. I want to change the trajectory of my family tree. I want to change the trajectory of what I feel like I've been traditionally just dealt these cards, and all of a sudden I have the option to either just fold them, or I can be like, you know what? All right, I'm gonna play these cards. I'm gonna go in right now and I'm gonna play. It's gonna be inconsistent. It's gonna be not pretty. It's not gonna be, a smooth sunshine and rainbows, but I'm not going to give up and I'm going to keep persevering. And this is my opportunity here. And I think if you can take that approach, man, like you can crush. It doesn't matter what, it doesn't matter if you've been put behind the eight ball genetically, like you're good, man. Like just think there's other people out there with no legs and no arms, and they're achieving like awesome stuff, And so it's just a reminder. I think it's perspective. And if you ground yourself in that, I think it'll be all good.
Yeah. No, I mean that's amazing, man. I couldn't. I really have nothing more to add to it. That's the way it is, right? Like it's just really deciding you're going to change things. The only other thing I did come across, just kind of like some key points on this, is just to summarize. Obviously, it doesn't fully, your genetics play a role, but it's not going to fully determine anything for you. You can always change your environment, change the way you view food, the food that you have in the house, your exercise routine, the people around you. That's going to be the biggest determining factor on if you achieve your goals with weight loss, fat loss, maintaining your weight. Have done like twin studies, like when there's like twin studies that genetics like when on around weight loss, where it's like identical twins raised in different environments have different body weights, right? So it's not like there could be one that's in really like bad shape because maybe that's what they've been around. There's one that's in fantastic shape, right? And then there's also no single obesity gene. So there's genes associated with weight regulation, but there's no single gene that's solely responsible for people being overweight or obese, right? So there's kind of the thing, like a lot of people do blame their lack of on
Yeah.
genetics, right? But like there really is like so many other things outside of that that are going to determine it. And if you can take control of those other things, it's going to make it seem like genetics has nothing to do with it, right? Like I said, you might be a little bit slower in the progress, but that doesn't mean you're not going to make progress and get to where you want to be. So hopefully this has been helpful for you guys. Again, all we ask, if you do enjoy this, just share it with somebody. This is a really, really good episode. We're going to continue doing these kind of episodes every week where we research different topics that we have had like thoughts on but haven't necessarily looked into the data and the research out there. Hopefully you enjoy this. If you do and you have a topic you want us to go at, drop it in one of the comments and we will make sure we get to it. Thank you again for watching, listening. We appreciate you, and we'll be talking to you soon.